Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Very wealthy paper. I have to admit that I read it 3 times, and still there is much to do about it. I would say it's political philosophy at its best. I will be less methodological. I'll be posing questions more than giving answers. And I will start actually with Annabelle's comment by making, political philosophy more political. The first question that comes to mind concerning both of you is, and using, of course, Arendt's reference to Arendt's tradition, is whose tradition? This is, I think, the most important question. It's not a problem of methodology as much as content. Whose tradition we are talking about, and who is invoked, and what is invoked, and what is the selection process when we speak about tradition, or when we speak about the relationship between law and the political. Who are the agents who comes up to mind when we speak about the relationship between the law and the political that we have to seek for, and we have to ask about. And I think these questions are in the heart of what comes up in Sheila's paper, but without clarifying it. There is something that has to be brought out in order to understand really what we are talking about, because political philosophy without a context, clear context, I think becomes a bit problematic, at least in my view, especially when we talk about the understatement inside the paper, which on the one hand speaks about pluralism, takes into consideration the difference, but as a social ontology rather than as an analytical position. And I think this this gap has to be brought up, has to be spoken about, whereas society is assumed to be diverse. This diversity is not taken into consideration when it comes to the relationship or problematizing the relationship between law and politics. In her concluding remarks to the article we just had, which concerns itself, as you have heard, with the origins of the law and its relationship to politics, Sheila argues, and I cite her, it's a long citation, in the process of repeating a term or a concept, we never simply produce a replica of the first intended usage or its original meaning. Rather, every repetition is a form of variation. Every iteration transforms meaning, adds to it, enriches it in ever so subtle ways. Every act of iteration involves making sense of an authoritative original in a new and different context through interpretation. The antecedent thereby is reposited and resignified via subsequent usages and references. Meaning is enhanced and transformed. Conversely, when the creative appropriation of that authoritative original ceases or stops making sense, then the original loses its authority upon us as well. Through such a process, we realize that there actually is no original, and that every original is a consequence of a prior interpretation or iteration, what has been accorded this status. End of citation. This argument comes after a thorough and eloquent discussion of Judith Seclar's and Hannah Arendt's understanding of the law and its origins. In her view, both see, and I cite her again, good law and sound legal institutions are the preconditions of decent politics. Sheila engages herself with the balance of the performative moment, and therefore I brought up the previous citation, which is the origination of collective entities, such as peoples embedded in the declarations of independence. This treatment builds on Derrida's engagement with declarations of independence. It reminds us of Benjamin's differentiation between constitutive violence, rechtssetzende, and conserving violence, rechthaltende, gazettes. But Sheila does not seem to agree with Benjamin, and she does not even mention him in this part. Of course, we discussed this before we started, and she says that her first chapter in the book that she spoke about deals with Benjamin. That's why he was not invoked in here. But definitely there is something there to speak about. Her understanding seems to oppose Benjamin's. Benjamin's too much reliance on divine violence rather than in myth and history. I tend to agree with Sheila concerning the rigidness of Benjamin's model. But if we continue Sheila's logic, then there is tension between what could be called proliferation of meaning and pluralism of meaning, and the differentiation between open-ended meaning of the text versus pluralism seems to be one of the tensions in the paper that has to be taken into consideration. If to come back to the citation I brought before, that there is always repetition and always variation, this proliferation of meaning is endless and becomes problematic. Whereas the first means, proliferation means the meaning is endless and thereby falls into either anarchism, everything goes, or nihilism, nothing matters. Pluralism recognizes multiplicity but does not fall into lack of rules and limitations. The Aristotelian phronesis, practical wisdom, or the Bordian social ontology, that society is the source of values which are built in our bodies, set limitations on the possible, something that I think has to be brought in order to prevent this endless proliferation of meaning that does not meet actually the logic of the state, which is, and here I'm referring to Adi Ophir, who speaks about the state as closure. That the state actually is not, it utilizes the reinvocation of meaning and the reinstitution of the nation, but at the same time, through the law, it tries to establish closure in order to actually control the political process. What makes meaning become normalized and how is this process related to power relations is not sufficiently answered in the paper. To what extent are we aware of the need to conduct a deconstructive genealogy of the performative moment or legal order in order not to fall into forms of domination conceived as the natural? How do we answer this issue? I think we would like to hear you refer to it maybe in the next comments. The genealogy of the legal system, how it has become what it is, becomes an important question. And I don't think that, speaking in general about it gives a sufficient answer in order to meet our expectations of maybe an ethical political philosophy that maybe shows the way without a priori determining what should happen. Performative moments seem to be not only violent but also exclusive, sui generis. Is that what you are trying to bring up? Are you trying to say that all orders are open to become forms of domination on the one hand, or liberal forms of power depending on certain variables that do not become clear, at least through this paper and through the discussion of Shiklar and Arendt, I think has to be more elaborated. Universal law, legality in Shiklar's, legalism in Shiklar's terms does not take into consideration, as I said before, diversity, does not, your discourse in previous books about women and about minorities and about migrants and so on is not invoked enough in the paper, and I think it could feed up the conclusion that you bring up in this paper. And I think despite the fact that you do refer to it a little bit, I think that socioeconomic, or the relationship between the socioeconomic and the political, is not fully addressed in this paper, at least, maybe in the book. I think looking at the political, without taking into consideration that the political is about the socioeconomic, and bringing up the treatment of shiklar, of injustice, as a very formal, as a very important and central concept of the political, I think is lacking in this chapter, at least of the book. I hope you will, in your comments, you will at least relax me and say that you're going to be dealing with this in different parts of the book. And thank you very much.